There are many early references of Jesus outside the New Testament. Today, we'll delve into the historical records that mention Jesus, offering a glimpse into how he was perceived by contemporaries and later historians. One of the earliest non-Christian references to Jesus comes from the Roman historian Tacitus. Writing around 116 AD in his Annals, Tacitus describes the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD and notes how Emperor Nero blamed the Christians for the disaster. He mentions Christus, the founder of the Christian movement, who was executed during the reign of Emperor Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate.
So one of the things I find interesting about when Christians try to use people like Tacitus to say that this validates that the Bible is true, is that it's not validating that the Bible is true at all. So let's talk about Tacitus for just a second and his validation of whether or not Jesus was a living being person, whether or not Jesus fed 5,000 people with a fish sandwich. Did he heal people? Let's talk about Tacitus for just a second. So when you look at Tacitus, then the first thing you would recognize is that Tacitus was a Roman politician. He was a Roman politician that was in what we call the Middle East today, and he was a governor. He was often asking people like Pliny the Younger for advice on how to handle different situations. But before and more than him being a historian, he was more of a politician. Being a historian or having hobbies like that were ways that ancient people validated themselves to be of higher culture, higher means, and to be remembered. So Tacitus began writing about many places. And if Christians are going to use Tacitus as saying that since Tacitus wrote about people who were Christian, who believed in Christianity in the 1st and 2nd century, then that validates the Bible. If that's the case, Tacitus also wrote about Serapis and wrote about the miracles that Vespasian supposedly performed while under Serapis. And if that's the case, then Serapis is just as real as Jesus. But one thing is interesting, Tacitus' writings about Serapis, Tacitus' writings about Christians, are not written, well, Christians were written during the time frame, a little bit earlier, but most of them are written after a certain amount of time has passed by that no one could go against him. No one could debate the issue. For instance, the video mentioned about Nero, Tacitus writing about Nero, and this is where a lot of the information that Christians have about early Christian treatment comes from, and you'll hear this repeated over and over again. But Tacitus wrote that Nero started the fire, blamed it on Christians, that if you wanted to, when you hear Christians say, you'll hear Christians say this one, if you needed a light at night, all you have to do was find a Christian and set that Christian on fire. And that's how bad it was for Christians during the beginning of the 2nd century and early 1st century. But that is so far from the case. This was propaganda that Tacitus wrote because Tacitus was under the Flavian dynasty, and the Flavians wanted to destroy the reputation of the previous Julio-Claudian dynasty. So writings about Nero being absent during the fire and doing all these crazy things, Nero was actually trying to organize assistance during the fire, whereas Tacitus wrote that he was 70 miles away. So we know that Tacitus wrote lies and propaganda for the Vespasians. But even without that, there were people who believed in Christianity, but it was still the Jews who were being punished more so than the Christians in 1st and 2nd century. Christians didn't really start getting persecuted until late 2nd century and 3rd century. But the massive people who were being persecuted were the Jews, who were still looking for a combative Messiah, an earthly Messiah who would overthrow the Roman government. So the Christians really didn't have it as hard as they like to make it sound in early 1st century and early 2nd century. It's not too much later. But they like to ride with Tacitus. Now, if Tacitus' writings are also true, Tacitus wrote about Germania, and he wrote about the different gods in Germania. He wrote about the different gods of the Mesopotamia. So he wrote about what other people believed and how they acted within their belief, and how that either worked with Rome or worked against Rome. So, to all my Christians out there, you either have to accept the fact that all other gods that Tacitus wrote about are living and true and real, or you have to say that none of them are. If none of them are, then neither is yours. But if yours is based on Tacitus, then so is theirs. But you also need to recognize that Tacitus was a propaganda writer of history as well, and that Tacitus often did get things incorrect, and so that that's something that you do have to look at, the politics behind everything that was written. And at the end of the day, Tacitus just proves that there were people who believed in Jesus, in Yeshua. He did not prove Yeshua actually existed, because he never would have met Yeshua. I believe Tacitus was born in around like 80 CE or somewhere around in there. The man never met him. Never met anybody that was supposedly an eyewitness to him. So Tacitus is not a good example. But tell me what you guys think. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.